Since the birth of the Federation, or indeed Starfleet, peaceful resolution has always been at the forefront of any potentially hostile situation, never building ships dedicated for combat, but instead to focus on exploration and scientific discovery. But could Starfleet actually defend themselves if the need occurred? Well, as anyone who hasn't been living under an intergalactic rock since 1965 will attest, yes, we can. And we have done, thank you, many times. That's not to say that we have never been on the decidedly short end of the stick when it comes to battle history. In fact, the most one-sided battle that I can recall anyway was of course the Battle of Wolf 359, in which nearly 40 ships and 11,000 personnel were lost. We may have mentioned Wolf 359 and its primary antagonist a little bit here and there. Their technological and biological distinctiveness escapes me for some reason at the moment, though. Anywho, it became clear that Starfleet's defenses for the Federation were tragically inadequate and needed to step up the game, and fast, given that their latest assimilation and key figure of the assault was the Federation's flagship captain, Jean-Luc Picard. That's right, we're diving straight into this one without even one mention of Patrick Stewart's other roles. Welcome to Trek Central, lords, ladies, and sovereigns. I am your host, Lieutenant Adam. Today, we're going to take a look at the Star Trek ship classes designed in mind primarily to combat the Borg. Now, you all remember the Borg, I assume you're familiar with them. They're the evil classroom bullies that pushed Jean-Luc Picard into the mud and made him cry that one time in front of his brother. Not really sure what happened to them after that storyline, they kind of fell off the radar for a while. Now, the heightened need for a dedicated warship type followed heavy losses against that one singular Borg cube that we touched upon in 2367, in which a staggering number of outdated and woefully outmatched ships were sent to try and, do something useful? I don't know, I feel like the entire Battle of Wolf 359 was an excuse for TNG's prop makers to kit bash. Am I wrong? You know what? Whether I'm wrong is irrelevant. What is relevant is we're on course to reach 100k subscribers here on Trek Central. So if you want to keep up to date on all the latest Star Trek news, lore, and more, then make sure to hit that subscribe button to never miss a video from the team here at Trek Central, including myself and my 17 multiple personalities. Stupid vinculum. So yes, today we are going to be taking a look at Starfleet's Anti-Borg fleet. As requested by one of our viewers in the Typhon class video, an amazing video presented by an absolute legend of a crewman, we're going to be covering the Norway class, as well as the Saber, Akira, Steamrunner, and of course,
the Defiant.
Damn it, Worf, that was my line. We'll have honorable mentions as well, but we'll let you wait and see those at the end. If you have a suggestion for a Star Trek ship you think we should take a look at, then by all means, let us know in the comments. These ships, for the most part, have done away with conventional starship configuration of the obvious saucer and secondary hull, and focused on smaller, compact profile designs. Defiant, Steamrunner, and Saber classes all have their nacelles built directly, partially, or completely into their hulls, unlike typical ships that have them sticking out for target practice. We'll start this one off, obviously, with the best starship ever to grace our screens. It's the Defiant! Yes, we start with the fan-favorite, tough little ship. One, because we have a bit more canonical info to work with, and two, because we get to use this.
Tough little ship. Little.
Now, the development of the Defiant class started in 2366 in response to the Borg threat to the Federation. It became apparent that it needed to be focused on. Now, we know that numerous issues plagued progress in space dock, hampering its launch, such as the amount of experimental technology, defensive options, ludicrous weaponry. Oh, who am I kidding? It's because the Defiant was way too overpowered for the size of it, and its structural integrity field just could not handle it. I feel like there's a joke to be made about that. Best not to. Now, where was I? Oh yes. The Defiant's engines were just too massive for its own good, nearly causing the ship to fly itself apart during trial runs. Such difficulties, coupled with the expected Borg invasion never coming to fruition, ended up seeing the prototype put in storage. Womp womp. But then, thanks to the new threat of the Dominion, it spurred the prototype back into life, seeing it officially designated an escort class and posted, Flaws et al., to Deep Space Nine, where all the kinks were ironed out by the station's crew, most notably the most important human being in the entire history of Starfleet, Miles Edward O'Brien. And as a result, many more were commissioned. The Defiant class was the smallest of the Anti-Borg ships, just 4 decks high and manned by 50 crew, with a minimum operating capacity of 5. Or the main cast of DS9, let's be realistic here. That said, it was not one for anyone in their right mind to mess with. Armed with 2 photon and quantum torpedo launchers and 4 forward-facing pulse phaser cannons, in which the plasma conduit ran directly through the primary phaser coupling, almost doubling the output of the cannons, making them way more powerful compared to the 3 standard phaser arrays also equipped, that is, 1 forward, 1 dorsal, and 1 aft, which themselves were there to supplement the directly forward-firing cannons, allowing ships of the class to engage multiple targets at once in order to perform strafing runs. Oh, and by the way, if you couldn't keep up with anything of what I just said, you can basically sum up the Defiant's combined arsenal with one word: boom. This frankly ridiculous amount of DACA was further supplemented by the sheer maneuverability of the Defiant. It could fly circles around practically anything it came up against, rapidly getting into position to deal as much damage as possible, with seemingly little effort. Defensive systems, of course, included your everyday deflector shields and ablative hull armor, which is handy in cases when shields are either disabled or dropped for transport, which happened a lot. Though it could be suggested that it wasn't standard issue, at least at first, as there was no mention of it. And considering how quickly 3 Jemadar fighters disabled the Defiant on her first mission to the Gamma Quadrant, the original NX Defiant, not the later renamed Sao Paulo, came equipped with a Romulan cloaking device. They weren't installed on any other ships of the class either. Most certainly not the USS Valiant, which is hilarious because that ship really could have used one. The Valiant was a perfect illustration that regardless of how tough it is, the ship is only as good as her crew. Now that's something the Defiant had in spades. The Romulan cloaking device, of course, was on loan from the Romulan Empire in exchange for information on the Dominion, and it was only authorized to be used in the Gamma Quadrant. Yeah, it was never used anywhere else, was it? No, it wasn't. Moving on. The Defiant held up against the Borg cube attack against Sector 001 in the year 2373, utilizing its ridiculous speed, power, and maneuverability to deliver some heavy hits of her own. The ship took direct damage from the cube to her starboard nacelle, which, thanks to being housed in the hull and protected by ablative armor, is likely what saved it from being torn asunder. Well, that and the Enterprise E diving across the screen, taking a bullet for its smaller cousin, and subsequently destroying the Borg beam emitter. Seriously, it was like watching Sylvester Stallone leap in front of a bullet meant for Chuck Norris. And yes, I did just make the Defiant Star Trek's version of Chuck Norris. You're welcome, it's canon now, deal with it. Without the Enterprise's attempt at protective martyrdom, the hit the Defiant took from that would have likely either heavily damaged or even destroyed any other standard design here shoot this exposed nacelle Starfleet vessel. It may even have blew up the entire ship. Though never stated or even shown in the franchise so far, Defiant-class ships have a nose, stocked full of warheads, which could be separated and deployed as a large projectile. Notably, the deflector is housed in that section, so unless there's an auxiliary deflector behind said nose, then the ship utilizing this tactic would likely become a sitting duck, so they better hope it was an effective hit. However, jettisoning a large chunk of your ship to inevitably explode is probably a last-ditch effort in causing as much damage as possible before going down. The class proved so formidable that 2 ships were sent along with an Akira class to stop and hopefully recover the latest and greatest in starship design, the USS Prometheus, which would likely have given them both a run for their latinum, had they actually been in a full-on opposing combat situation. The Saber class is a uniquely shaped Starfleet ship, to say the least. Its nacelles connected at the front and directly into the primary hull that flows straight into the secondary, which just sort of sticks out at the back, like a ping-pong paddle. It features a forward launch bay, not something seen in many other ship designs, which are historically aft-facing. Running slightly larger with 6 decks, but only armed with 4 Type 10 phaser arrays and 2 torpedo launchers, they are protected by deflector shields and the increasingly standard-issue ablative armor. The class, though a light cruiser, may at first appear inferior by comparison to many other ships, but its small profile and fast maneuverability gives it a hell of an advantage in combat situations. Oh, well, you'd hope so, being sent to fight a Borg cube headed for Earth. I mean, come on. Even though it was a new design, it would appear to be an older era of ships than the brand new Enterprise E, which consequently showed up to save their hull in the Battle of Sector 001, as we mentioned before, in which several steamrunner, saber, Akira, and Norway class ships, along with the new flagship, made short work of the Borg cube by volleying an already heavily damaged portion of the hull, whilst non-vital, potentially a section on the verge of breaking apart anyway. Like all the other ships intended for future Borg attacks, the Saber had a helping hand during the Dominion War, effectively supporting the fleet and the largely outdated yet still reliable Excelsior and Miranda classes, which by this point have already seen 100 years of service, but hey, don't fix what isn't broken, right? The Steamrunner class was an absolute tank of a ship, substantially larger than the previous classes, with 18 decks, operating with approximately 200 personnel, and room for up to 50 passengers and an additional 550 in evacuation conditions. Although, why on earth you'd want to use what amounts to a gigantic torpedo launcher as an evacuation vessel is any bugger's guess. Officially a long-range heavy frigate and a heavy blockade runner post-retrofit, authorized in the late 2360s by the Perimeter Defense Directive to patrol the Federation borders in response to incursions. Boasting a pair of rapidly reloading torpedo launchers, both connected to a large stock of warheads, it was able to keep up with a steady barrage against any foe, complemented with a phaser array of 4 Type X banks, which can cover a full 360-degree firing arc on both the ventral and dorsal sides of the ship. The Steamrunner is a drastic change to Starfleet design, in that it had a larger saucer compared to its engineering section, which housed the navigational deflector, and would later become a similar feature of the increasingly loved California class. And like the Oberth class, they too featured a detached secondary hull. It's unclear, however, whether there is a turbolift access to that section through a protected shaft in the nacelles, which are layered with ablative armor. The nacelles are embedded at the Bussard collectors in large cowlings of the saucer, which gives them maximum protection to the forward section, in addition to providing cover for the inset bridge module from multiple angles. The Akira was never named on screen, the class designation derived from production sources. The ship class has very recently appeared on screen in Star Trek Picard, where it didn't last very long, it would seem. Oh well. A heavy cruiser by definition, crewed with 500 personnel and an evacuation limit of another 4,500. Intended to be a carrier of sorts, with its large underside shuttle bays and 3 doors to launch from the fore of the ship, with a single large bay door at the aft for approaching craft, they would be largely protected from most angles by the rest of the ship, should they be in a combat situation. The Akira does have echoes of the Miranda class in it, with just a saucer primary hull and catamaran-style pylons connecting to the large weapon pod and warp nacelles. The bridge was better protected by the pylons from the sides and the weapon pod from the rear, making it mainly targetable only from above or in front. The navigational deflector is nestled into the underside of the saucer, again with protection in mind. It's not on show from anywhere but head-on. A multitude of tactical systems were also incorporated into the Akira class, which included a phaser strip that covers the majority of the circumference of the dorsal saucer and 2 more on the ventral, offering a wide range of coverage, but its most prominent feature is its amount of torpedo launchers on the port and starboard of the ventral hull, and at least 1 forward of the deflector. God only knows how many in the aft weapons pod. The Norway-class medium cruiser type entered service in 2369, manned by a standard of 190 crew, an evac limit of 500. In common with the other Anti-Borg ships, it sported the latest in propulsion, offensive, and defensive systems, yes, including ablative hull armor, and a configuration intended to lessen its target profile. It had an almost flat design, its widest targets only being dorsal and ventral, featuring a triangular primary hull with beams running backward to pylons to support the warp nacelles. The engineering hull is mounted atop the primary hull behind the bridge, covering 2 large shuttle bays, each housing a wide range of support craft, including shuttlecraft, pods, worker bees, runabouts, and even maintenance platforms. The class had very few viewports, owing to it being protected by, yep, you guessed it, ablative armor. Though a small craft, it had a compact but powerful warp core, giving it a top speed of warp 9.7. It was armed with 2 photon launchers with a magazine of 225 torpedoes each, backed up by 9 phaser arrays, and on later retrofits, phaser cannons. At least 4 Norway vessels saw action in the Battle of Sector 001, with 1 being destroyed by the advancing Borg cube itself, later aiding the fleet in the Dominion War, acting as a support craft, and in such situations, using its 500 accommodation limit to evacuate crew complements of other vessels. It really is a tragedy that the Norway class was lost wholesale when the digital artwork for it just went poof one time. Oh wait, that's not in universe canon. I said nothing. Moving on. They were also stationed at Starbase 375 during the Dominion War. The class remained in service in the 2380s with the USS Mjolnir patrolling the Federation's Zenkethi Coalition border of the Hellespont sector, reporting updates twice daily to the Federation's Hellespont space station. Wouldn't be at all surprised if the nebula in that sector had some kind of thunder and lightning qualities to it too. Maybe not. The successor to the Norway is the Oslo-class heavy escort, as mentioned earlier, which were designed to be modular, allowing components to be swapped out with the Norway's sister ships Akira and Zephyr classes, allowing for a much wider range of mission loadouts.
Sir, there's another starship coming in. It's the Enterprise.
And finally, yes, the Sovereign class, Sylvester Stallone in Starship 4. Although it wasn't designed in direct response, along with the rest of the Borg busters to combat the Borg, the Sovereign was loaded with the latest tried, tested, and best equipment, such as quantum torpedoes, trialed by the Defiant class, and of course the EMH Mark I Doctor, not a doorstop, making it ideal to assist in such situations involving the Borg. At the height of Starship design, it's not surprising that the class was used as the Federation's flagship, the Enterprise E, which swooped in to help save the day, aiding the surviving Defiant, Norway, Saber, and Steamrunner ships at Sector 001, which themselves had already outlived the Admiral's ship, and made short work of the Cube, with a strategic target supplied by Captain Picard. Post-refit, the Sovereigns were armed with 16 phaser banks on various points across the hull, 1 quantum and 3 photon forward-facing launchers, and 6 aft launchers. If a fleet of Borg ships arrived, any ship would want at least one of these at their back. Just a shame they pretty much vanished during the events of the Dominion War. But that wraps it up for our designated anti-Borg ships and others that have proven their power to be able to hold their own against that indomitable foe. Which one's your favorite? And why is it the Defiant? Which one do you think could do with some more screen time? Like the Defiant? Let us know in the comments below. Or even feel free to tell me to shut up about the Defiant. I won't, by the way. If you want to keep up to date with all the latest Star Trek news, lore, and more, then again, make sure to hit that subscribe button. Never miss a video from the team here at Trek Central. You can also follow us on social media or join our community Discord server. For now, ladies, gents, and sovereigns, I've been Lieutenant Adam. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time. Live long and prosper, my friends.